everyone. Okay. All right. So I don't know. Hello everyone. Let me welcome you to the Cooper Election Climate Forum. Great to see you all here. Really important event, I think, in the lead up to our federal election. So welcome on behalf of the Darebin Climate Alliance. The Climate Alliance is a grouping of 25 or so local Cooper-based groups who are really concerned about climate change and the destruction of the environment. So it's great. This is really actually our inaugural event together. So it's great to be having this as such a good start to our activities. So welcome to all of you. Welcome also to our candidates. We're really delighted that everyone has been able to come, including those who are just recovering from COVID. So introducing you to our candidates, Celeste Liddle from the Greens, Kath Larkin from the Victorian Socialists, Ged Kearney, our sitting member from the ALP, Rabin Bangaar, thank you, from the Animal Justice Party, and Adrian Whitehead from the New Fusion Party. Great to have you all here. Also really pleased to introduce our moderator, Emeritus Professor Judy Brett. Many of you will know or will know of. A local resident, a very well-known political historian with all sorts of interesting publications, including The Coal Curse, and most recently from the Secret Ballot to Democracy. So very expert in this area. Just some of the housekeeping things. This session is being recorded and will be posted online somehow, the way these things happen today. So please make sure your phones are on silent. If any of you need to slip out to the loo, I gather you go out there, you go to the right and then to the left. You should be able to find it that way. And I think that's all that I need to say now before I hand over to Judith. So, okay. I forgot the really important part, which is the acknowledgement of country. And I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting here today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and pay respects to members who are Indigenous people who are here today. I think it's just really, really important when we talk about climate change to be considering Indigenous peoples. When I give this acknowledgement, I'm thinking of my gratitude for their caring for the country for the last 16,000 odd years. Also my grief and anxiety over the powerless state that land is now in. Gratitude also for their wisdom and what we can learn from them in terms of restoring a safe climate. And also hope that we can work together to do so. And also remembering that, of course, many Indigenous peoples are very much on the front line in terms of suffering the impacts of climate change. So I'm sorry, I nearly forgot that. Okay, but you didn't. But I did until I forgot to turn the microphone back on.
Okay, it's on. It's on. So we can record it as much as anything, because I actually could project to the back of the room. Now, just to let you know how the evening's going to proceed, you should have, well, do you already have the bit further away? The candidates are going to speak for about for exactly, I should say, 5 minutes each. We have a timekeeper who at 4 minutes is going to ring a bell, and at 5 minutes the guillotine comes down. So, and they've been asked in their preparation to answer or to speak to 3 questions. Why are you standing for election, and what is the most important issue for you? How worried are you personally about the climate emergency? And if you're re-elected or elected, what action would you and your party like to take or would you take to address the climate emergency? So that's in a way the bulk of what we're going to do. And then we'll have some questions that have been already submitted by the Climate Alliance folk that I've got written, and I'll read those out, and people will have an opportunity, our guests, to respond to those. And then there'll be time for questions and answers from the floor. Or questions from the floor, sorry, no answers.
I'm sure you've got all the answers.
So now we have a running order, and this order has been established by a publicly witnessed ballot. So everything above board here. And it begins with Kath Larkin from the Victorian Socialists. So Kath, your first
Sit here or stand?
Yes, you better get the mic, sorry.
Right, well, I too want to stand in solidarity with Aboriginal people who are very much on the front line of fighting for climate justice. So why am I standing and what are the issues that matter to me? Well, the planet is burning. Well, it can't possibly be 4 minutes. The planet is burning. Women are being raped in the halls of Parliament. Refugees are turned away and tortured. Older people are abused by a for-profit aged care system. Black deaths in custody continue unabated. The unemployed skip meals. Billionaires made an absolute killing during the pandemic, while the average worker's wage went backward by $800 or more. So the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Our house is on fire, and I believe mainstream politics has nothing to offer us. We need a socialist alternative. The first and most urgent task of our generation is to redistribute wealth by taxing the rich and putting that money to work, saving the planet and building a society that works for everyone. So how stressed am I about the climate emergency? Well, as a young, low-wage worker, extremely. Time and again, climate disasters show that it's workers and the poor who suffer the most, forced to work in unsafe conditions, living in the most vulnerable accommodation, and left to rely on degraded, underfunded, mostly volunteer public services, which we saw in the mega fire of 2019 to 2020, which caused not only enormous devastation in the towns, but also forced workers in the cities to choke on the smoke. And the recent once-in-a-thousand-year floods, which happened a couple of times within a few weeks. Meanwhile, the wealthy can afford to shield themselves from the worst impacts of the crisis. They move around the world much more freely than us, buy property in the safest places, or like Kim Kardashian, can pay for private firefighters and helicopter evacuations for themselves. And of course, the inequality and human cost of climate change is most striking when you look at climate refugees. All of this horrifies me, but it also motivates me to fight for system change. So I was proud to march with the students in the school strikes. I was proud to be one of the socialists who organised 30,000 people to get out onto the streets in the wake of those bushfires in 2020 when the Victorian government and the media were telling us not to. I was proud to be part of the Blockade IMARC Alliance, where we protested the mining corporations. I stood arms linked with protesters as we battled pretty extreme police violence. And of course, as a unionist, I fought to put climate justice at the centre of everything we did. So if elected, what would we do? Well, one thing to say is, elected or not, I'll be part of this fight like the people in this room. But we want to take the money out of politics. Enough of politicians ruling for the rich. Let's bring pollies into line with the rest of us, put them on a worker's wage, impose a serious tax on the polluters, and end the public subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. Victorian Socialists want to urgently push past this talk of net zero. Net zero is a dangerous fantasy. Climate scientists have warned that net zero is licensed to a reckless and cavalier burn now, pay later attitude. It allows carbon emissions to continue and has seen them soar. Net zero is simply not a solution. And while something can sound better than nothing, Actually, if that something just papers over the real crisis, then it is no improvement. So Victorian Socialists are campaigning to bring the energy sector back into public hands with democratic control to transition rapidly to 100% renewables by 2030 to produce an actual zero emissions economy by 2035. And all of this should be done in a way that provides for climate justice, the protection of Aboriginal land, safe haven and citizenship for climate refugees, and guaranteed secure jobs and retraining for workers from the fossil fuel industry. And we need a lot more that I won't have time to go into, but an immediate ban on new coal mines, a ban on coal power fire by 2030, a ban on logging of old growth forests, and an urgent program of reforestation, sustainable farming and biodiversity protection. An end to all fracking and unconventional gas extraction. And you can see the rest on our website. But as socialists, we're not claiming that we can just, with a stripe of the pen, fix all of these things overnight. But we think that this is what we need to do. We need to use every tool at our disposal to send a message. So I encourage people to vote One Victorian Socialist, allow your preferences to flow, but tell the major parties, we need zero now.
Now we've got Ged Kearney, the current sitting member for Cooper.
Now standing.
Yes.
I too would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to First Nations peoples here tonight. We have Celeste, and I'd just like to acknowledge Jan Stewart, a wonderful Mudumuti Wamba Wamba woman who is a brand new senator, and we will be welcoming her to Parliament. Fantastic to have you tonight. And also I'd like to acknowledge Kath is here tonight as well. Kath Larkin is another colleague. So why am I standing? Well, I think Kath really outlined the parlous state of the country at the moment, and I'm not going to go over all of that. You did a great job, sister, telling us how terrible a state the country is in after 10 years of Scott Morrison, whoever all the other people were before him, too long. They really have left us, or have put us, this country, in one of the most distressing positions. But tonight I think you're very interested to know that the main reason, or one of the main reasons I'm standing, is because I know that the people of Cooper have climate change as their number one issue. And I know, for the last 4 years, I know what it's like to be in the decision-making table. I've been in the caucus room, I've been in the shadow ministry, standing up for this electorate's values, really for the last 4 years. And I'm hoping that you have seen that I have done a very good job representing your voice and your values at that table. I'm of course incredibly worried about the climate emergency. I had some wonderful advocates from 350.org in my office. I don't know if they're here today. Yes. And I'm going to talk about you, I hope you don't mind. And you were sitting in my office and you were going to tell me the one reason why you are an advocate, and you started to talk about your children and you started to cry. And it just really brought that home to me. I have 4 beautiful grandchildren, and this is why we're doing this. This is an existential crisis, absolutely. And I've been campaigning on climate change for more than a decade now. When I was at the nurses, a long list of things. We really started climate and environmental policy at the Nurses Union when I was there. I was a founding member of the Climate and Health Alliance, which is CAHA. When I was at the ACTU, I wrote, well, not just me, I'd like to say I did, but I didn't really. There were quite a lot of us who worked very hard on the Just Transition Policy, which is an excellent policy that the ACT put together that was used as a model for Hazelwood, for working with the Latrobe Valley, and I'm happy to talk more about that later if people would like to know. Now, as an MP, though, I see the main job is bringing your incredible wealth of knowledge to the decision table and to the decision makers area. With your help, we've had a lot of success. I'm looking around this room at some wonderful people here. I've been able to put you, sometimes quite scarily, in front of the shadow ministers for climate, Mark and Chris, a number of times. They hear directly from you. And Chris and I are in constant contact on the developments of climate policy. I consult you and I feed your views directly to him immediately. In doing so, we've made a real difference. With Jane Morton's help, I moved a successful motion at Labor's national conference to declare a climate emergency, and that motion led to Labor tabling legislation in Parliament. And again, with Jane, we worked with a wonderful man called David Spratt. I'm sure you all know him. I put him in front of Chris Bowen with Jane's help, and now national security is at the centre of our climate policy, thanks to that advocacy. It's Kath, the wonderful Kath Rouse, who's introduced me. I'm sure she's introduced me to David Lindenmayer. There you are, Dale. David Lindenmayer, and we were able to put his wonderful work directly in front of Terry Butler, and will play a vital, important part in rewriting the EPBC Act if we are elected. I don't know if Graham from Village Power is here, but because Village Power had an absolute plan about how to work with community batteries and how they would work, we won one here for Cooper because we had that group of people here ready and willing to go. We had Lou. Is Lou here, who wrote our fabulous Get Off Gas pamphlet with a great group of people, with people actually distributed. Sue Matthews, along with Kat Theophanous, we're going to have a whole public housing facility here without gas. It's fabulous, and that came from this group, and of course Karen and Anne, who've done absolute wonderful work. There's gorgeous Lumina, who is a young woman in this electorate who's working with me to tell me what young people want from COP when we actually do host it, and Labor intends to do that. In terms of policy, we've really worked hard in a policy that's about bringing people together, not dividing people. We made that big mistake last time. We created a Calvinist wedge. We all fall for these awful wedges, and we fight each other on this, so that it actually created an abyss that was filled by One Nation, and an abyss that was filled by the Liberals. We have to find a policy that is uniting, that everybody can get behind, and I'm proud to say that ours has. We've actually got all of those BCA, the farmers, the ACCI, all supporting it, and right through to important environment organisations like the ACF. I haven't said a thing about what's in that policy because I've been talking too much about other stuff, and now my time's up. Is that my time's up? But we'll be able to do that in questions. Someone please ask me, Ged, exactly what it is, please, so I can get to that later. Sorry, I went over time. I told you I waffle. Thanks, everyone.
Bangaar from the Animal Justice Party. No, we need it. Here we are.
We live in a time where there's the most disposable income ever in history, and yet there is the greatest amount of poverty, homelessness, mental health issues, despair, wars and hopelessness, and destruction of the environment. People talk about a bleak future. Why? Why is that so? The current policies and government funding is not adequate to address these issues. We lack visionary with leadership attributes. I want to change that paradigm, and I found that AJP resonates with my thinking. Good evening. My name is Rabin Bangaar, standing in the seat of Cooper for the AJP. I stand to make a difference for the community. I want to contribute to a healthier, safer, secure place for the present and future generations. The Animal Justice Party is the only party with core values and policies for people, environment, and animals. It's called Neurohumanism. Neurohumanism is humanism expanded to include the entire creation, all varieties of human cultural expressions, animal and plant world, and even unto the inanimate world. This is visionary thinking. Kindness, equality, rationality, and non-violence underpin our policies, and I'm sure it's what every one of us in this room really wants for society. It's not abstract terms, and I think it should underpin all government policies as it resonates with how we feel. For me, mental health is a major issue. I work in the disability sector and exposed to what families go through with suicides, caring for loved ones with disability, anxiety from peer pressure, social media impacts. The COVID impact isolation has highlighted these issues. We require much more funding and better policies on qualifying criteria for families. Climate change is also impacting on mental health of people through flooded homes, jobs, lack of jobs, rising prices of food and essentials as their buying power diminishes. So what worries me personally about the climate change? We cannot continue as a society, as the world is definitely warming and sea levels are rising. There is evidence-based worldwide on this. We are going to be flooded with environmental refugees as neighboring countries disappear due to the rising sea levels. The work pattern is changing, the weather pattern is even more destructive as it results in higher cost of food and other living expenses. Animal sea life and plant extinctions due to global warming sets a bleak situation for the future. If elected, what action would I take and my party? Before talking about that, I want to talk about what Animal Justice Party climate emergency policies, and talk about what the causes of climate change doesn't really get enough attention, and that is animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is one of the biggest contributions to climate change, particularly through the production of greenhouse gases, including methane, and due to its role in deforestation. Australia's own submission to the 2018 UN FCCC shows that methane from Australia's 28 million cows and 70 million sheep will have more impact on the climate in the next 20 years than all of our gases. Animal agriculture is also a leading cause of deforestation. Between 2020 and 26, more than 91% of the land cleared in Queensland was to create pasture. So what does the Animal Justice Party want to do about this? Declare a climate emergency and develop a serious action plan that includes a commitment to reach net zero emission by 2023, and also join 111 other countries in the global methane pledge to reduce methane gas from 30% by 2030, remove subsidies and start phasing out industries that damage our climate, like the fossil fuel and animal agriculture industry, support clean energy, plant-based agriculture, and deforestation. We also need to protect our existing lands, sea habitats from destruction. Thank you.
Now we have Adrian Whitehead from the Fusion Party.
Hi there, everyone. Just apologies, I've been teaching Year 8 girls all day today. I'm still recovering. Yeah, I know, it's unbelievable. All right, okay, why am I standing? I'm an environmental campaigner. I've been one since I was 16. I've liked to campaign on the edge my whole life. That's why no one funds me. I've done things such as was one of the core team that set up the Otway campaign to create the Otway Greater National Park down there. I got employed to stop the Nace Valley Dam, and if you go to Canberra now, you won't find a Nace Valley Dam. We stopped it. I've set up Beyond Zero Emissions, and Matt helped me do that, and then I eventually handed the rein to Matt, and he took it most of the places with Mark and all the other team there. And part of my project here is to push climate change to the edge. And you might remember a few years ago we had a lovely local candidate called Martin Ferguson, and when you used to front him around climate change, unlike Ged, who gets up there and says all the wonderful things she's done, he used to go sort of fuck off, like that, something like that, pretty much. You know, he said, we just got to keep running coal, man, whatever. Yeah, he did say he's quite rude, but in a really blunt and honest way, right? And because of the work that we've done, we now have a local Labor candidate called Ged in a seat that, unless we'd all done it, we wouldn't have a Ged, right? And then one day we might even have a Celeste or something, right? So, you know, it could go. But this is the work that we've been doing. My point at this election, though, is that, sadly, the current Labor Party's policies are literally suicidal. Like, literally suicidal. Ged knows that. Hopefully she can change it. Currently, the Greens' policies are literally suicidal. They're not talking about absolute full speed, reversing global warming. They're not talking about putting up the replacement solar reflection that we need to maintain our temperatures below 2 degrees when we shut down those coal power plants. They don't talk about that. If I was elected, the one thing I'd do would talk about the truth of what we need to do to actually save ourselves and our children and everything that we care about. Right now, we're playing a game of narrative. You might have noticed that in COVID. People like the narrative, not the truth, okay? So, you know, we spent people are still wearing surgical masks. Has anyone actually looked at the US CDC and read what surgical masks are used for? Guess what they're not used for? They're not used for stopping viral infection. 0.101. So we're going out there and we're going to tell the truth, or I tell the truth. And I'm hoping that through this continuing campaigning exercise, that one day we might get Labor, one day we might get a Labor Greens coalition that will actually do something to try and save us. All right? And because if we don't, in a very, very short time, perhaps years, we'll see the first global food crisis, and that might actually be underway with the invasion of Ukraine. Countries will collapse, wars will start, people might even fire nukes at each other, and then the entirety of our organised society might start to unravel. Now, in a place like Australia, with our massively over our food production is something like 200% what we need, we might survive. But is that enough in a world where we could do so much better? And the sad thing is, we live in something like a corptocracy. Now, they use the word corptocracy because you can't actually say it. And if you can't say it and you can't name the problem, then you can't get at it, right? So it means the world's sort of ruled by corporations. And sadly, that's influencing, we know the Liberals are their puppets, but we know that that impacts Labor as well, all right? And so part of my role is simply to be here to, one, say the truth, to educate the community, to create the space for Ged or Celeste. They're the two people who are going to win, if anyone, right? One of those two. And it won't be me. So, 1 minute? Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. So, to create the space where they can tell the truth. They can take the actions and promote the truth that we actually need to do to save ourselves. Because we've run out of time. We've run out of time to play narrative. We've run out of time to pretend anything less than reversing global warming at full speed will save us. Net zero is still putting petrol on the fire for another 30 years. That's the policy of Labor and Liberal, right? And it's just not good enough. So help Ged or Celeste, tell them that climate emergency is really important to you. Vote for me. I've done a lot of good stuff, all right? If you're a climate person, put me number 1. Doesn't hurt your vote. Goes along full value, put number 2, because we all know that everyone ignores the impact of animals on climate change. If you look at the heat that we're experiencing today, it's pretty much almost equal to the cold, right? Right now, the heat, because of methane's massive. And yeah, use your vote, vote me 1. It also takes $1 or 2 away from the big parties as well. That's quite important, sorry. All right, thank you.
And last, we've got Celeste Liddle from the Greens, who's been ill, so we're pleased that you're feeling a little better.
I'll explain that. But look, I also want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I'm an Aranda woman whose traditional lands include Alice Springs, Rumbantwa, and then east and southeast of there. The Wurundjeri have cared for these lands for millennia. They never ceded their sovereignty. A treaty for use of these lands is yet to be negotiated. Until this injustice is rectified and reparations made, I pledge my solidarity to the Wurundjeri in their ongoing struggle for justice. My name is Celeste Liddle. I am the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Organiser for the National Tertiary Education Union, and I have been for 11 years, longest job title ever. I'm also a writer and social commentator who has been a columnist for Eureka Street, Fairfax, The Guardian, but has also been published in many other publications. I'm an activist. Most prominently people might recognise from the Invasion Day rallies, but many other movements. And I'm Cooper's democratically endorsed candidate of the Greens for this election. I apologise for reading a speech. Yesterday I both turned 44 and left COVID isolation. Given that I'm still recovering, I wanted to ensure that my words were not clouded by COVID fog. I first moved to this electorate in 1997 and apart from a couple of years in the middle, I've lived here ever since. It is due to my love for this electorate, its people and the values that we hold dear that I am standing. The last 2 years, wealth disparity has grown, people have lost jobs, and racial vilification has impacted many. Through this, I realised that though I still believe strongly. Real change happens at the grassroots. A comparative handful of people make decisions in this country which impact the lives of millions, and so we need more voices on the floor challenging in Parliament as well. This electorate votes to the tune of over 80% progressive. We care deeply about the climate emergency, social justice, First Nations justice, refugee rights and the social safety net. This seat hasn't been a Labor coalition two-party preferred seat for over a generation. For democracy to be as robust in Cooper as it is anywhere else, the choice must be about which progressive candidate best represents the values of this electorate. This is why I'm proud to be Cooper's Greens candidate and humbled to be sharing the stage with these other incredible progressive candidates. This is the choice voters of Cooper deserve. I was in primary school in the 1980s when I learnt about chlorofluorocarbons and what was then called the greenhouse effect. What has happened since the 1980s has been disgraceful. Due to media obfuscation and political parties beholden to the fossil fuel industry, scientific research has been ignored, social awareness has decreased, this country has failed to act, and we are an embarrassment on the global stage as demonstrated by Morrison's performance at the COP26 summit. The time to act on the climate emergency was yesterday. Australia is a wealthy nation with bountiful natural resources. We must pull our weight under the Paris Agreement to keep warming under 1.5 degrees so we can ensure we don't doom future generations to annual catastrophic bushfires and floods, regular 50-degree days and more people displaced by climate change. This is why the Greens' policy platforms on climate change are multifaceted and inextricably linked to humanity and our global responsibilities. We must reduce greenhouse emissions by 75% by 2030 and achieve net zero or net negative by 2035 so future generations do have a future to look forward to. Net zero by 2050 as proposed by the Coalition is not a climate target, it's a planetary death sentence. The Greens want Australia to become a world leader when it comes to the development and export of clean technologies and energies. By taxing billionaires, investing in research and training and manufacturing, we aim not only to create thousands of jobs in the renewable energy sector, but also in related sectors such as higher ed, Indigenous land care management, environmental rejuvenation. We will remove subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, phase out new exploration projects for fossil fuel extraction programs, oppose the 114 new fossil fuel coal and gas projects planned by the major parties, and pressure government to install binding annual climate targets. Finally, though, any transition from fossil fuels to renewables must be just. This is why the Greens want to commit millions towards creating job stability, institute household pricing which reflects the actual cost of clean energy, and increase publicly owned infrastructure. The new energy grid must be publicly owned, public transport must be expanded, and new housing projects must adhere to sustainable guidelines. Thank you for letting me speak.
Okay, now I've got some questions that were already put in from the Climate Alliance members. So the first one is from the Newlands Friends of the Forests. Victoria's tall, wet mountain ash forests are the most carbon-dense forests in the world. Unbelievably, with legal exemption, they are still being logged to make Nippon opal cardboard. This increases fire risk and severity, reduces our healthy water sources, increases emissions, as well as destroying the habitat of many unique threatened species, such as the greater gliders and leadbeater's possums. Will your party strengthen Australia's environment laws with binding national standards that apply to all industries, including the native forest logging industry? Describe how your party would protect nature and forests in particular as part of the solution to climate change. It's a very big question. And I think I'll just randomly, we'll start up there and we'll go down. Now, I've got all these questions and not every party needs to answer each of them if they don't feel it's especially relevant. Do you want to...
Yep.
1 minute each.
1 minute, okay. Just give us a beat. So, stand up? Someone's saying stand up. Okay, so my environmental campaigning began in forestry. I was a frontline forest campaigner. I got beaten unconscious by a logger and almost killed with an axe handle. Of course, I've got my heart is in forests. So I was in East Gippsland, southeast New South Wales, Tasmania and the Otways. Those forests that they're talking about in that question, the first logging event releases 400 tonne a hectare, right? And I didn't know this question before tonight, I just heard it then. And if you put a $10 a tonne carbon price, it bankrupts the entire logging industry overnight, bang, right? So if something as simple as that could be done, I wouldn't be doing that. I'd just be stopping the logging and doing regenerative restoration of all the log forests that we've done. And there's billions of tonnes we can draw down if we do that. But it's not just logging, it's the land clearing. And it's tragically sad that in this day and age, our state Labor government is subsidising an industry that would have collapsed of its own accord, right, if it didn't prop it up for the last 10 years out to 2030. And so it's just absolutely, well, it's disgusting. And look, and the decisions that governments are making today will one day be judged in court around their actions on climate change. And things like logging or doing gas fracking off the coast in this day and age just should be stopped.
Look, these are serious things that we need to address, and as the Animal Justice Party, we want to, as mentioned before, we want to remove these subsidies and start phasing out industries that damage the climate. Carbon credits needs to be looked because it's not actually working throughout the world. I've been very active as well in the environment area. I've been on the board for the Wilderness Society for over 3 years, also fighting hard for the environment. I think we all have to really fight with governments to change these policies because they're just not working. And that's what we will do. We will continue to try and phase out these subsidies because that's the one that's really, really creating all these destruction to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Newlands Friends of the Forest, and I'll never forget the day you took me up to Toolangi Forest to see that beautiful place, and it was a great experience, and we actually saw a lead-beater possum, which was amazing. We have, as part of our policy, an absolute commitment to review the EPBC, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act, and to implement the Samuel Review in full in only 1 minute. That means I can't really go through that to tell you exactly what that means, but I think the Newlands Friends of the Forest would be aware of what that means. And so it means we would absolutely have better environmental standards, that we wouldn't be handing over all of the power to the states, that we would actually cement a greater power for the Commonwealth in these decision-making processes, and that we would have an incredibly strong COP on the beat that would make sure that we absolutely stick to we put those standards that we write into the legislation when we review the EPBC Act. So I know that, as I said, it's only a minute, but I hope that answers to the Newlands Friends of the Forest, because I know they know what I'm talking about, so thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no two ways about it. These forests need to be protected, and the only way to do that is to stop logging them. I think it's a pretty simple commitment to make, to stop logging old growth forests and to regenerate, to plant new ones. We need to make up for some of the damage that we've done, but the very least that anyone who actually cared about climate change, about forests, about Indigenous rights actually would do is to guarantee an end to this logging. It's disgraceful that this industry is subsidised by the Labor government, and it's not just these forests. It's also the last one of these, we were talking about the sacred trees that were being cut down by a Labor government. Like, it's just not on. To stand with Indigenous people to fight climate change, we need to protect these forests, stop logging them, and start growing new ones.
Should we stop applauding? Is that all right? I was just trying to say, hold on. We'll applaud you, Celeste, and then
All right, I got a free applause, so it better be okay. Stopping logging, $6 billion to establish a nature fund, creating thousands of jobs in restoration, in protection of nature and biodiversity, in things like weed management, pest control, revegetation, biological research, monitoring, more jobs for Indigenous rangers, and more Indigenous land care programs that are developed in partnership with traditional owners to ensure that these lands, these trees and these totems are protected.
So I think now we might stop the applause, and everybody gets each of the candidates is going to have a 2-minute reply chance at the end, so that gives you a chance to applaud them all again. But we've got 3 more questions, and so that would be another 12 rounds of applause. So our next question is from Philip Sutton from Research and Strategy Transition Initiative, and I'm going to start with you this time, and then we'll... Okay? Yes. You don't have to answer it. I'll have my red out question. Does your climate policy spell out what has to be done by when to meet identified protection needs of the climate vulnerable?
Yes, we do. So, as I discussed earlier on, we've set net zero emissions by 2023. We also want to join the 111 other countries in the global methane pledge to reduce methane by 30% by 2030. I also talked about the removing of subsidies and phasing out industries and that damage our environment.
Still got 1 minute. Okay. We have taken to this election one of the most comprehensive climate policies ever presented. It's nearly 100 pages long. It was written by Reputex, which is a very reputable organisation, and it is all costed, it is all absolutely watertight, and nobody can really undermine it from the naysayers, the climate naysayers. So it's all written there for everyone to see. Just briefly, there's $20 billion to rewire the grid. If we don't rewire the grid, creating renewable energy is useless. We have 400 community batteries going in, one of which I said was coming in Cooper, 85 solar banks for blocks of flats that can't put solar on their roofs, and for low-income people who can't afford solar panels, we will have solar banks to feed them off the grid. Restoring the Climate Change Authority, this is incredibly important, because I know a lot of people are critical of Labor's targets, but if we restore the Climate Change Authority, they will be an independent authority that will give us independent advice based on the science about our targets, and will force us to be accountable for what the actions that we do. We will make our ministers stand up and report every single year exactly what they have done. Oh my goodness, $3 billion investment in renewable tech, parliamentary report, 10,000 apprentices. We're going to have the COP, which will be great.
Okay, you have another 2 minutes, don't worry. I've got to get better at 1 minute.
Well, in terms of meeting targets in a timely way that will actually allow us to save the planet, it has to be now. It has to be immediate. It has to be rapid. So the Victorian Socialist policy is one of bringing power back into public hands. This will give us democratic control over power. It will also help drive down the prices of electricity. We know that privatisation is something that drove prices up. And that we want to transition very rapidly to 100% renewables. This will mean enormous amounts of jobs, it means enormous amounts of researchers, but the technology to do these things is possible. We have it. So we need to do that immediately. So we want 100% renewables by 2030 in order to achieve not a net zero economy. Net zero means continuing to emit carbon. It doesn't take, it's, you know, as Adrian said, it's suicidal. It doesn't take us anywhere near far enough, and it's really just cover, it's nice words, while the planet continues to burn. So we need zero emissions by 2035, which we can achieve with a renewable economy.
Okay,
This way.
this way.
Yeah.
Oh no, that way. So this way. Hang on, yeah, that's right. Sorry.
I don't know if
this is back to Adrian.
Sorry. I'm going to leave the mask on. Can people hear me through it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Look, I went through a couple of the targets in this speech, so I won't repeat them, but I will repeat the fact that that, you know, holding governments and making them accountable and making them report on an annual basis how they are driving towards the targets is one of our most important things. You know, there needs to be continual accountability. That's what our position from the crossbench is going to be. It's going to be ensuring that the government is working as hard as it possibly can to get to, you know, the sorts of targets and the sorts of things that we are pushing towards. Sorry, I'm starting to
That's
play.
okay.
Yeah, the short answer to Phil's question is yes. However, we frame it slightly differently. We think we're already in the position where we've gone way too far in order to protect the world's most vulnerable. So our policy is quite simple. It's to go to massive net negative emissions as soon as possible, and, you know, across the entire sector of the economy, leave nothing out. Do it at an emergency speed, in an emergency frame, do it in a just way, and there's not going to be a problem with jobs because there's so much work to do. The problem will be lack of workers to do the jobs. The other issue is then how you deal with the 1 degree that's been held off from the sulfates that are being produced by coal power plants at the moment. If we shut the coal power plants down, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, the temperature on average jumps a degree. So we've got to actually replace that reflectiveness somehow to create a global cooling. So that's all in our policy. Fusion's a hybrid of 5 different parties that were forced upon us when Labor, One Nation and Liberals and Nationals all got together to smash the micro parties back in May. And yeah, have a look at our website and have a look at Vote Plan's website for the details.
Okay, so our last question that's been submitted, this is from DCAN. Will your party act to reform political donations from the fossil fuel industry?
Thank you.
Yeah, this very interesting question of donations. It's something that nobody wants to tackle before an election. You know, none of us, not even the Greens, not even us, but it's something that you need to do when you're in government, and there's absolutely no doubt that we need to reform donations policy in this country. No doubt about that. Not just from fossil fuels, but you have to think about, you know, big pharma. There's all, you know, who else is trying to influence people? So yes, absolutely, we will cap donations. I think one of the bigger threats, though, in my view, I think the whole donation system or the whole political funding system needs to be looked at. It's okay if we say, okay, fossil fuel companies can't donate, you can't donate more than $1,000, etc. That doesn't stop the Clive Palmers of the world with $80 million coming in and running massive campaigns, putting green posters up all over the country and sending all their preferences through to the Liberals. So it's not a simple thing. It's something that you have to do in government. All of government has to do it, and I would hope that we would get support from any other parties that we had to review the whole political funding system. Full stop.
Yeah, there absolutely has to be limits on what parties and individuals can spend on elections. It's the only way that you can approach making it fair. But on the question of fossil fuels specifically, well, Victorian Socialists are for ending fossil fuels, so there would be no fossil fuel companies to donate to anyone.
I kind of need to echo that because in a way, yeah, yes, absolutely. That's, you know, I don't have an awful, I'm really sorry, I don't have an awful lot to add to that, but yeah, you know, we're driving towards 100% renewables, so we would be, you know, we want to end donations by fossil fuels, and we want to, we do want to reform other donations as well through various mechanisms.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hi. One thing that unites all the micro parties in Fusion is an absolute despair at the state of our political system at the moment, and whether it's donations or it's just general corruption. I mean, the other day when the energy minister just signed away, a couple of $1 billion of carbon credits so they could then sell them on the open market and make like 10 times the amount of money, whatever it was, 5 times the amount of money, that the taxpayer at some point conceivably will have to then buy back at even higher pound. And that's not a criminal act. I mean, seriously, let alone the targets, right? Okay, so there's corruption everywhere, and of course we'd cut all corporate donations.
Look, I resonate with most of what people have said here. We are certainly wanting to look at the whole donation system. It just doesn't work. It doesn't actually benefit the greater community. So, and fossil fuel will certainly be on that agenda as part of our climate policy. Okay. I have to say the candidates are being extremely disciplined. It's terrific. So we've now got time for questions from the floor, although we've already got a question from Jane Morton that's come in. Now, do you want to ask it or do you want me to read it out?
Because I was going to ask Ged about... take the microphone. No.
Ged, quite a few years ago, signed the pledge that some of these other candidates have signed to, Kath and Adrian, to support the declaration of a climate emergency. So I was going to ask her what she's done inside Labor to support that, but she took a lot of her speech explaining that. So I don't know if anyone else wants to explain what they're doing. Well, if you want to say more, or if anyone else wants to say if there's battles inside your own party that you're having to fight for that position. And I'm hoping you'll all support this pledge to declare a climate emergency. But yeah, so it can probably be brief.
I just have one thing. You're right, we did cover off on the things that I've done, thanks to your hard work. But the other thing that we have done is we circulated a wonderful booklet that Jane put together about how to talk about the climate emergency, because it's language that you don't want to be alarmist, you don't want people to run away from it and block their ears, so there's a certain way to do that, and we've been educating Labor politicians right across the board about how to do that. Some successful, some not.
Without a doubt, we support declaring a climate emergency, and that's one of our core values and principles.
No, we don't have to answer everything. Yep. I mean, because in some of the parties it's obviously at the core that obviously there's more of a fight inside of Labor than there is, I think, in the parties, the other parties represented here. Like you've got because you've got all those Queensland. They voted for the climate emergency. Yeah, no, well, that's terrific. That's terrific. But I'm sure we're all very aware of the tensions inside of the Labor Party around this issue. So
I think I need to comment on that. I don't think that's very fair. No, since I've been there, actually, we've worked incredibly hard to get consensus on this. There are certain members of the Labor Party that lost their ministry, their shadow ministry, because of the hard work that we did, because they were the main devisers. And we actually have absolute consensus now going forward on this, and there's 100% support behind the policy that's there. So I think, and I like to take a lot of, not me personally, but since I've been there, I think it's been quite obvious that I fought very, very hard with that, and to the point where certain people are not going to run at the next election. So, yeah.
Okay. Now, Felix from the Socialist Alliance as a Senate candidate,
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Judith. I enjoyed your sausage book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So my name's Felix Dance. I'm a candidate. Thank you.
It's just for the recording.
My name's Felix Dance. I'm the lead candidate for the Senate for Socialist Alliance. We're not running in the lower house in Cooper, I'm afraid, but we are running Sue Bolton, the local councillor in Wills. So if you come from Wills, please vote for her. Otherwise, across Victoria, you can vote for me in the upper house. Now, Socialist Alliance is an activist party, and we work with trade unions and local communities to fight for change. We believe that the capitalist system makes it impossible to truly tackle climate change just through Parliament and the legal system because of the way corporations and vested interests distort the democratic process. So my question is about how the candidates see their role in Parliament, if they're elected, in addressing climate change. I want to know how the candidates will use their platform in Parliament to advance a movement-led response to the climate emergency, or whether they'll just turn up to Canberra and debate the bills and then go home. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to start?
Yeah, look, I'm an activist myself, and I thought if I got elected, I'd basically just be hassling people the whole time while I was there. If the bill wasn't to do with climate change, I'd be I'd probably do a Clive Palmer or something, fall asleep, whatever. No, I'm joking. But my role would be to voice the truth around climate change and say it again and again and again and again, and get out there in community and do it, and use the funding of the Senate, that comes with the wage to probably employ someone else to help me, as well as the staff and whatever. So I think that there is a role for someone in Canberra to actually say what we need to do, right? And that would be wonderful. Whoever it was, it'd be great if there was someone like that there.
Look, I think that would need a very strategic approach to it. So the way my approach would be to actually form strategic alliances with people that are actually resonate with the same values that we hold. And that's the way to actually work within the system to try and get a better outcome. And there's always people that cross over, cross benches, and people move from one party to another in terms of voting, etc. So I just think that you have to look at it very strategically. And the other thing is just to try and get community behind you to actually voice their opinion, so that we can actually put pressure on bad policies and get this changed.
I think that's you've been sort of last.
Yeah, Celeste, we can go to Celeste.
Okay, I'll give it a go. I said in my speech that I believe real change happens at the grassroots, and my opinion hasn't changed on that, even though I'm standing, for the seat. So my tactic would to be loud, to continue to remind people of their responsibility to act on the climate emergency, to continue to remind people of their responsibility as politicians to support Indigenous land care management programs, and to continue to work with activist groups so that we are responsive to the community, to the actions that are going on, and accountable, like continuously accountable. I very much see that there is a need for ongoing activism. I also said in my speech 30 years of ignorance, and I've seen that and how that was played out in the media and in politics, whether it's fossil fuel donations or it's the Murdoch press deliberately distorting and ignoring the scientific evidence. And I think that re-education of the population is one of the best ways that we can go.
I'm a revolutionary socialist. I'm an activist. All of the Victorian Socialist candidates are activists, including our Senate candidate Aaron Mulbarganam, who is a refugee who fled a genocide in Sri Lanka, was detained in the detention centres here, and then has spent his whole life fighting for refugees, fighting for the oppressed, as a union organiser, as the founder of the Tamil Refugee Council. So we'll continue all of that. For us, we want to be in Parliament to shake things up, to draw attention, to be a megaphone for every movement on the streets, to be a megaphone for all of the oppressed. And that absolutely includes fighting for climate justice. So it means using your media connections to speak out about the climate emergency, to take on the big business interests that are destroying the planet. It means turning your office over to an activist space. Whatever resources we have should be shared with activists so that they can push to make that change.
Well, thanks very much. Well, when I was first elected, I started to meet with all of the wonderful climate groups that are in Cooper. And I think I added up one time there were about 24 fabulous groups. And so one of the things that, because I really wanted to take their voice to Parliament, so one of the things was we established the Climate and Energy Reference Group that we met regularly in my office. It suffered a bit under COVID, but that was a really great place for us everyone to come together so we could all get on the same paper, and we established a strategy for me to do a couple of things. One, to take that strategy that we developed with that group to Parliament and to make speeches and be a voice, as a megaphone, as Kath says, for those people that came along. It was to go to the Labor Party and say that this is what my electorate wants, and if you want me to get re-elected, we have to deliver this. So I was able to do that. It was able for me to actually influence legislation so that when we are discussing legislation in Canberra, that I actually bring those voices there and we can actually influence. And last but not least, it's about bringing you to the ministers and putting you in front of the politicians, which you do very effectively and very well.
Okay, now we've now got really a chance for questions from the floor. I've got a note here to see if there's anybody from the organising of the school student strikes who wants to speak. Who has a question? Okay, so I should just open. Any questions that people want to ask that haven't been covered already? You've had a go, Jane.
No, I was just going to take the microphone.
Oh, sorry. There was one up the back. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not a school striker, but I have helped organise uni student climate justice protests, including the big protests against the bushfires a couple of years ago.
We don't need your credentials.
Sorry, yeah, I was just saying. I was just wondering, because it's like a big issue. I'm a refugee campaigner as well, which is relevant because a big issue now with rising sea levels is obviously the fact that we're really expecting to see so many climate refugees, especially from the island regions around Australia. I just think it's I'm interested to know what the candidates and the parties think should be done about that problem, especially when it's I find it hard to believe, I guess, just that the Labor Party can be trusted to really take serious action on climate.
So the question is about climate refugees.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Party's policies. Okay. Celeste, do you want to start?
Sorry. We need two microphones.
Look, this is one of the reasons why I brought up climate refugees when I was giving my speech, because in the Torres Strait we've got cemeteries of Torres Strait Islander people that have been inundated with sea waters and bones floating out into sea. The remains of ancestors just being allowed to disappear. This is, it's happening more and more all across the Pacific. We're going to see it more and more, and we need to be doing everything we can to reverse this problem and also to support those communities, both to, if they need to settle somewhere else, and providing everything that we can in order to ensure that. But if they need to rebuild, then giving them all the resources that we can to do it. Indigenous people worldwide bear the brunt of climate change, and it's something that I've said over and over again. So I'm just going to repeat that and state that, as many resources as we possibly can to try and reverse this tide, because we cannot have our ancestors washing out to the sea.
Yeah. Well, I think, obviously, part of the answer is about our government doing everything they can to play a role in bringing down carbon emissions to get to that zero emissions. But on the question of refugees specifically, Victorian Socialists are for open borders. Obviously, there had to be an asterisk over that for health reasons during COVID. But we think that everybody should be allowed to come to this country. Our government, we are one of the worst emitters of carbon. Actually, we are responsible for our government and the businesses here are responsible for creating these climate refugees. We absolutely owe it to them to help bring them here, safely. It's been outrageous and disgusting to see the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, it seems actually led by Anthony Albanese in this election, to go back on the dog whistle politics of talking about boat turnbacks, of talking about not letting refugees stay here. Victorian Socialists think that refugees should not spend a single day in detention. No child should have to be locked up in the way that Aaron was.
This is a really timely question, so thank you for the question. Right now there's a group of wonderful people here from the Torres Strait Islanders. They're called the Torres Strait 8, and they, 350.org came to speak to us about it, and I'm meeting with them next week. I'm really proud to say it, because climate change is affecting the Torres Strait. It's not just far away, the Pacific, it's actually here in our own country, and it's a really important question. And I just want to say what a relief it was to hear Penny Wong on the radio yesterday morning when Dutton's up there saying, China's coming into the Pacific and China, blah, going to war. They asked Penny Wong, what would you do about it? She said, easy, I'd deal with climate change so that we can actually go into the Pacific and we can make sure that their homes are protected. Not just mitigation, not just adaptation rather, but mitigation. We will do that. We would actually increase our aid spending. We would actually put back ABC shortwave radio right across the Pacific. So all of these, it was so lovely, and I just thought, oh my God, I wish Penny Wong was our foreign minister right now. And so, yes, absolutely, it's an issue, and we would deal with it sensitively, and we would make sure we had a decent climate policy so that they didn't have to come away from their homelands, or that their bones of the buried loved ones were washing up on the beach, which is what we're hearing from Torres Strait 8.
So for me, all types of refugees are important to me. I spend every second week taking food parcels to refugees, asylum seekers and homelessness, because they're all dear to my heart. Specifically to your question, yes, it's important to have policies that actually support it, because we are actually contributing to these environmental refugees. And I think the engagement needs to have with them. It's so easy to say, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give so much of subsidies out there. But I think we need to find out from them, with engagement with them as to what they require, and give them the support, because we are contributing to this. And unless we change some of our policies here, and as I said earlier, declare a climate emergency, we are contributing to this. So we need to have much more engagement and start actually setting up funds to be able to support them. Thank you.
And I think it was 2008, I went to the COP MOP in Bali, and at the very end of it, as it closed, I was around a table outside, and the people on that table were from Kiribati, Tuvalu and the Cataract Islands. And we laughed and cried together because 10,000 people had just spent 2 weeks or whatever it was campaigning for targets that were not going to save any of the people around the table, nor was it going to save any of the 10,000 people, right? This complete delusion of what is needed to actually stop climate change and reverse it continues today with the targets that we're seeing. Think about it this simply. It's if you don't create the conditions where Greenland refreezes and stops pouring water out into the ocean, all of those lying Pacific Islanders are gone. There is one pathway to save them, and that is to reverse global warming in as short a time as possible. And our party's probably the only one who's got that policy. Thanks.
Okay, now we're about 4 minutes over the schedule I've been given. So I'm going to not take any more questions from the floor. The candidates each have got a right of reply of 2 minutes each. So, and I've decided they're going to do it in alphabetical order this time, just to keep things mixed up. And if the candidates could try to not just repeat things they've said, but use this 2 minutes to perhaps address things that they were cut short on or didn't have enough time in their original creatures. And we're starting with Rabin, because he starts with beef.
Thank you. Look, with lots of deep conversation, I want to finish off on some hopeful note and talk about a few of our positive changes that Animal Justice Party has done. In Victoria, we successfully pushed for pets to be defined as animal members under the Family Violence Protection Act, got rid of legal loopholes that was allowed for wombats to be shot for recreation. In New South Wales, we ended the use of dolphins and whales in entertainment and obtained mandatory lifetime animal bans for animal abusers, a 8-fold increase in penalties for animal abuse, and amended the working with children check to ensure that animal abusers cannot work with children. I think we need to have good policies to protect the survival of all occupants of this world. We are the highest form of living things on this planet, and with the ability to reason, think from our heart mind, and be intuitive, not instinctive. Nature conspires for your survival since you were born. Any slight change in air and temperature and you would not survive. Now we have a responsibility to look after that. Leave a legacy that far outlives you by minimizing your carbon footprint. I certainly hope you would support a party that is visionary in its thinking for the present and future generations. The time for change and action is now, not in the future. Lastly, a big thank you to the organizers of this event. I appreciate having to participate and hear from all the other candidates. Thank you to everyone who's come along. It's really encouraging to see like-minded people who want to make a difference in thinking about our future and the significance of what this election has for us. Thank you.
It's alphabetical order now.
Okay, and I'm going to read so I get everything out. Now, thanks everybody for coming this evening. Thanks to my fellow candidates. It's really been terrific, and thank you, Judith, for emceeing so well, and thank you to Darebin Climate Alliance for hosting. The election, I think, literally this election, everyone in this room agrees the number one priority is to get rid of the Morrison government. That is number one priority. Our existence depends on it. And once we do that, which I've got to be honest, we found out last time isn't easy. Let's not remember that terrible time. We need a government to take their place that will take action that we need on climate. And the only party really that can form government with a real plan to do this with detail and with bringing people together, doing it in a way that doesn't divide the nation but actually brings people who are being impacted on side with the ability to get it done is Labor, and we will go hell for leather if we get in. I've spent the last 4 years bringing your values directly to the top, to the leader, to the shadow minister, to the ministry table. I've brought the decision makers to you here in Cooper, and we are able to win government, and I want to be able to continue doing that, what I've been doing for the last 4 years, but as maybe, who knows, maybe as a shadow minister, because it matters. It matters being in the room. We've made so much progress already. We've had so many wins, and the power of being in government cannot be overstated. I know you knew that. I know you know that. So I hope you'll support me so that I can be there in the room with you on the other side of this election, making the decisions, bringing your voice to the table. I want to thank you for all the wonderful support you've given me over the last few years. Thank you for teaching me everything you've taught me. Just think of the base that I came in at and where I feel I am now. I know I've still got a lot more to learn from all of you. I can't thank you enough for the support and how wonderful you've been to me. Thank you. I want to keep working with you.
So it's something that I want to take up. There's this, I think, pretty false narrative that exists in our world today, that the main divide exists between a sort of socially progressive inner city elite and then kind of perhaps socially democratic but on economic questions but socially conservative kind of working class. I just don't think that's true. Actually, I think that Labor plays into this. Ged in particular plays into this argument. This talk that tackling climate change seriously, that doing it in a way that will actually get us to zero emissions is in some way divisive. But actually, this is because of the parameters that the Labor Party themselves set. Jerem Small, who's our candidate in Cornwall, has spent a lot of time up in the Hunter Valley talking to coal miners, talking to them about how they feel. And actually, they know that the industry is problematic. They don't like it. They're getting terrible illnesses working in these dangerous workplaces, but they don't believe that a just transition is possible because no one with any power is actually going out there and saying that that's what they're going to fight for. So why would you believe it's possible if no one says they're going to do it? Ged can talk about this climate emergency that the Labor Party is taking up, but Albanese is out there every day saying he's going to support new coal mines. This is the exact opposite of what we need. This is what Victorian Socialists stand for. We're proud of the fact that we do as well in the working class, migrant, blue collar areas like Broadmeadows as we do in inner city areas like Northgate and Cooper. We think that that is rebuilding a sort of biting working class politics is what we need. One of the things that really inspires me when I think about some of the most successful environmental activism is the Builders Labourers Federation, a union that went out and, yes, fought for their members' rights, fought for pay and conditions, lifted the standard of the entire working class, but also took on questions of social justice, of Indigenous rights, of women's rights, and famously the Green Bans, which stopped $5 million of development. This can be done again. Victorian Socialist stands for rebuilding that, fighting working class resistance.
Kath's already taken the BLF, and I was going to talk about where the Greens got their names from eventually, but yes. Look, I think one of the saddest things, and I'm gonna do a personal reflection here. One of the saddest things that I had to watch recently was when Malandiri McCarthy was delivering a speech in the Senate. In support of the Beetaloo exploration and fracking stuff, talking against, what it was that she felt, what it was that her community felt about that, and how she was going to continue to try and fight to ensure that they were heard in this process, because the Labor Party room had decided to vote that up. It was really hard for me to see, as someone who has seen Indigenous lands continually destroyed by fracking, by mining exploration, by all sorts of things, to see people going out there saying, no, we need to protect, we have thousands of years of knowledge, we can rejuvenate, we can heal these lands, we can reverse the tide of climate change, but you need to be listening to the knowledges that are intricately linked with these lands for thousands of generations, and to never ever have those voices actually heard when they are more crucial than they have ever been before when it comes to turning the tide of climate change is just devastating and extraordinary. I come from a family that has an Indigenous protected area that through that has been able to rejuvenate lands that have been previously destroyed by cattle mining. Cattle farming, friggin' hell. COVID fog. 700% renewables equals new jobs, equals injection into higher education for research and for retraining. It equals new societies, and we need to be pushing towards a better future for all. That's what we've always got to think of. What future are we creating?
Hi. So, climate change is the most serious issue we face. All right. Your vote at this election in this seat, it's not going to determine whether ScoMo wins or loses, sadly. It's about Ged and Celeste. Greens versus Labor. I'd like you to vote me number one. I'm the climate emergency candidate. I've got the history, I've got the experience, I'm the real thing. The more people who vote for me helps send a message to Ged, helps take Ged or Celeste a message back into Parliament saying, hey, people care. Regardless, you should vote for all the minor parties. If it's not me, someone else, this guy down there, etc. Anyone on the progressive side who cares about climate change, because we've got a problem with the two-party system at the moment, and it's a problem on both sides of politics. We need to break that somehow. The one thing I didn't hear tonight from Celeste that I really wanted to hear was, what would you do in the position where there was multiple Greens holding the power position of forming government? And Ged's explained what she would do very well, but I haven't heard that from Celeste, and I'm going to put that down to COVID fault.
That was my last paragraph.
Oh, was it? I'm so sorry, because it's the most important paragraph. And from a climate campaigner perspective, my perspective, I want a candidate that's going to leverage the crap out of that and put the screws on and make that their number one priority. So vote for me or the other guys first, me preferably. But in your decision, you've got a decision to make, which are the two major parties, and in this context it's the Greens and Labor to vote, and it's a difficult decision. Jed's probably a little bit too safe on 14%, one might think. So maybe, anyway. But do we want to, anyway, I'll leave it there. How safe can you be? Yeah, I know someone who's spending a huge sum of money in a safe seat. You're going, really? Man, anyway.
That's it for me, and my notes tell me that I now...
Oh, we've got a Senate candidate too, sorry.
Well,
we're in so much trouble. Put on the video, Mike.
We're actually now going to talk about the Senate. So, Anne, and Jane's going to talk about the Senate.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you to all the candidates. You've all been extraordinarily well behaved and extremely interesting with Judy's moderation and the help from Keith and Helen as timekeepers. So that's been fantastic. But we do now want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the Senate. So Jane's just going to say a bit about the Senate, because that's a really critical issue for us. And she's been working with the Victorian Climate Action Network on a statewide thing.
Look, the important thing about the Senate is that over the last couple of elections there's been a new system. This is where you only have to vote for a minimum of 6 above the line, and that black box thing where the parties decided your preferences is gone. So that's good. But the sad thing that's happening is that on the right of politics, they advise their people to vote for about 10 above the line, right? They cover all those right-wing parties in their cross-preferencing. The left has a tendency, I don't know, to underestimate their voters or something, I don't know why, but they tend to advocate only 6 above the line. What we're working on at Vote Climate and DCAN is just a recommendation for 13 above the line. It encompasses everybody who's better than the really bad ones. If you want to keep going, you can, there's 22. But it gets sort of harder. Like, do you put Liberal above Palmer? Palmer's worse, but there's more chance of defections. We've got Jackie Lambie out of. So once you get down to the really bad ones, it's hard to choose. I leave that to you, right? But there's 13 that are better than the really bad ones. So the important thing is to number all of those. So we've got a quick voting guide, which is just a very simple one. It's got the 7 best to put in any order, the 5 next to put in any order, 4 next, and then it's got 2 that are legalised cannabis and the Dare and Hinch party that have really got no climate policies, but they're probably better than the worst, right? When it comes to that last place, like when all the votes have been distributed, if it's Clive Palmer against one of the micro parties, and you haven't voted for that micro party, and probably not him either, right? You're not in it. You're not going to help decide that last place. So it's just a voting strategy. If you vote for at least 13, for everybody that is better than the absolute worst, you're maximising your chances. So what we've got is the brief one up the back. That's a pretty final one. And we've got a detailed one, which is the almost final version. It's unfortunately got a couple of extra hyphens in it, but really, if you don't worry about that, you can have a look at that as well. The absolute final perfect version will be up on Vote Climate and DCAN pretty damn soon. And that's for Victoria, but we will do every state eventually.
What about below the line?
Well, you can do below the line, but only about 1% of people do, and they really often end up informal.
But I thought you'll get vote 6 above the line or 12 below the line.
Yeah, you can just vote 12 below the line if you want, but you really should vote about 100 below the line.
How many are there altogether?
There's 22 parties, and some of them have got 4 or 5 candidates, so you've got about 100 candidates. If you actually know enough to number all 100, well, good luck, because I don't.
If you go wrong, you can ask them.
Oh, you can, but you're better off trying to number 1 to 13, I would say, than 1 to 100, especially when you don't know the difference between the candidates who are within the party. Any other questions? I'm really happy just to discuss later.
Thanks very much, Jane, and I hope that's a good reminder about the importance of using our Senate votes really well. So this takes us basically to the end of the formal things. So I again want to thank Judy for being our moderator, and it's a small little thank you from us. Thank you. I'm sorry your candidates our thanks to you candidates is going to be in our votes on the 21st of May. But thank you all for coming along. It's been really, it's really good to hear that so many good ideas as well as the nuances of where the differences are. Thank you to Celeste for coming despite COVID fog. I think that's very brave of you. We really appreciate it. I also want to thank SPAN for letting us use these facilities, SPAN Community House. Your help in setting up and everything else. Great to have done this event with the Darebin Climate Alliance, so thank you to all our Darebin Climate Alliance members. And before you go with all this talk about what things we should do, we are hoping that, as Jane says, there's going to be the scorecard finalised very soon. We're not going to letterbox all through the electorate this time, but we are hoping to distribute them at polling booths, including pre-polling booths. So if you would be willing to help with that, that would be great. Another thing we think is, there's a sign-up sheet for these things. Another thing on the sign-up sheets is if you'd like to put a fence sign, a house sign up. We've got 3 different versions up at that back there. Climate Emergency Act Now, Rebel for Life, and Declare a Climate Emergency. If you'd like to get one of those for your fence and can encourage your friends and neighbours and everyone else to do the same, I think that makes a difference, especially if you live close to a polling booth. And we're also hoping to try to do a bit more of a systematic campaign to get lots of our signs up around polling booths. So if you'd like to help with doing that, doing a bit of door knocking and asking people, would you like to have a house sign, we'd really appreciate hearing from you for that too. So I think that's basically it. We'll see.
Do we know where the polling booths are going to be?
Yeah. It is. It's all on the. It is. Yeah. One of the pre-pollings is up on the AEC side, but not the second one. Are they both up now? Okay. Okay. So we do know, but I don't. Anyway, I hope you are all enthused to do your best to get the very best candidates elected in Cooper and in the Senate. Remember our sign to change everything, is like all of our candidates have told us so forcefully. This is something we all have to be doing our bit on, and you've shown that by coming along tonight. So thank you very much.